It's one of the most notorious and heartbreaking murders in history. The mysterious death of JonBenet Ramsey. It's left law enforcement reeling with questions for over 2 decades. But no one has been more devastated than her family. And the fight for justice is far from over, as they have yet to uncover what really happened to their little girl. Today, JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, is here in a daytime exclusive interview, speaking out about what really happened that fateful night, the speculation around his family, and the brand new DNA evidence that could get him closer to finding his daughter's killer. JonBenet Ramsey, the 6-year-old beauty pageant queen forever etched into our minds as the haunting face of the country's most baffling murder mystery. It's been over 20 years since her small body was discovered by her father in the basement of their Boulder, Colorado home, rendering the rambling 3-page ransom note left behind pointless and even bizarre. Now, more than 2 decades later, JonBenet's murder remains unsolved, despite extensive investigations and theories that have focused on a variety of suspects: neighbors, intruders, international pedophiles, and even someone inside the house, causing years of compounded heartache for JonBenet's parents. But in July of 2008, the Boulder County District Attorney finally exonerated the Ramsey family, 2 years after JonBenet's mother, Patsy, lost her battle to cancer at the age of 49. Today, John Ramsey continues his crusade to see his daughter's killers brought to justice. John Ramsey joins me now. It's been over 20 years since you lost your daughter. How's John Ramsey doing?
He's doing well. I am good. I remarried. I was single for about 5 years after Patsy died. I have 3 children that are living. They're doing great. I'm very proud of them. They have grandchildren now, so
it's a good feeling. I have some of those too.
They're a lot of fun and amaze you, actually.
Your beautiful daughter, JonBenet, would be 28 if she was alive today. What kind of a woman would she have been, do you think?
Well, you know, I always think of her as a 6-year-old, my 6-year-old daughter. That's how I remember her. It's hard for me to imagine what she would be like. She was very outgoing, very gregarious in a very unique way.
Can I take you back to the evening of her murder? I know this is painful, but it helps to put the pieces together, which is what we're trying to do today. When did you first realize she was missing, and what did you think had happened to JonBenet?
Well, you know, we had this ransom note which said she was taken, and it's a horrible, horrible feeling.
So you called the police, and when they come, what did they do?
Well, they sent us police car and one person, and the first thing he said, well, did she run away? And heavens no, she's 6 years old. She didn't run away. And I showed him the ransom note, and the note said, we will call you tomorrow. So we waited for the phone to ring. And the amount of money that was asked for in ransom was a strange number, $118,000. You know, why not $1 million? Why not? You know, where did that number come from? It meant something to the killer, obviously, but that was, I thought, very bizarre.
Did it mean anything to you, that number?
Well, I'd actually received a bonus of $118,000. And it was on every pay stub that I got for the rest of the year.
So someone knew enough about you to know that you'd gotten a bonus?
Well, it wouldn't have been difficult if you'd have gone through our house and, you know, our drawers and stuff.
So, as painful as the loss of your daughter, there's also the pain of being, at least having members of your family accused of being involved with this. This ransom note, I've seen some people argue Patsy was responsible for. Leave that accusation aside as preposterous. How did it affect you to hear those kinds of allegations?
Well, at the time, we were crushed by the loss of our child. So all this other nonsense it didn't matter. You know, we'd lost our child. The accusations, it was noise level stuff compared to what our real grief and pain was.
So let's go back to that evening. You find the ransom note, the police are there. They're sort of figuring out if JonBenet ran away or asking some questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand you're sent out to search the house. So is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They asked us to go through the house, see if we saw anything unusual. So we started in the basement.
Oh.
And noticed some things that were not right. There was an open window. There was a suitcase under the window, standing up, and I immediately said that doesn't belong there. That's not where we would have put it. Mm-hmm. And then I went into the other room where we found JonBenet, and very quickly found her. And so I never really went any further in the house.
And what did you do when you saw JonBenet? What went through your mind? That terrible.
Well, it was relief. People say, well, that had to be the worst moment of your life. No, it wasn't. I had found my child. I found her. She was back in my arms. And I fairly quickly realized that this wasn't good.
We're back with our daytime exclusive interview with JonBenet's father, John Ramsey. Now, John and Patsy were criticized for the way they handled their daughter's death, being called unemotional in news footage and interviews. What was going on inside of you?
Oh, it's torment. You're crushed. I'm not a outwardly emotional person, and everyone reacts differently to stress and to tragedy. There's no book written on how you should act or what's normal. There is no normal. It was baffling, but as Patsy said, I've already been taken as low as I can be. This doesn't matter.
So in the middle of all this, the police, as they do their investigation, as you mentioned, suspect the family, because family's around.
Yep.
You've got to be on the list somewhere. When did you realize that you were actually a suspect? How did you have an epiphany?
Well, it was a day or two after, and we had gone to some friend's house to stay, and I got a call from a fellow that worked with me, and he said, John, I got a call from inside the system, didn't say who. He said, the message is, tell John to get the best defense attorney he can get his hands on because they're coming after him. They think he killed his daughter. And I thought, what? But it was like, okay, I got the message. And the detective was there that morning, made the statement, I know John was the killer because I saw it in his eyes. I thought, well, that's a remarkable talent.
John, he thought you were the killer.
Yeah, the woman detective said, I saw it in his eyes, I knew he was the killer. And in fact, I counted the bullets I had in my gun to be sure I could defend myself. It was nonsense, but that's what we were dealing with. We want to help them. We want to find the killer of our daughter. And they also, which we didn't know at the time, we were preparing to go to Atlanta, which is really our home, to bury JonBenet, and they wouldn't release the body to us for burial until we consented to an interview.
They extorted the body.
Yes. And the district attorney intervened and had the police release the body so we could bury her. That was the final straw in terms of having any trust in their capabilities or honesty. And so from that point on, the relationship was very tenuous.
So a decade later, the Boulder police exonerate you for the murder of JonBenet.
Well, the district attorney did, and she issued a letter of clearance and an apology to us for what had been done to us.
Did that give you a sense of relief?
Well, it didn't, because we knew we were innocent. It's just like, when are you going to figure this out? But what it did, it was like, okay, in my mind, it was, okay, great, thank you very much. Let's find the killer. Let's keep going here. And that was how I felt. It wasn't over. It was just the beginning of the beginning.
Well, part of the tragedy, from my perspective, is that your beautiful wife, Patsy, passed before she learned of the exoneration. How big of a role did this cloud of suspicion play, do you believe, in her illness?
I don't think the suspicion bothered her. Patsy was a very strong woman. I think the loss of her daughter just devastated her. She was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in '94. So she tried, I think, to pack a lot of things into her life and her relationship with her children, perhaps knowing that she wasn't going to be around when they went to high school and got married. And so that was her focus. Her focus at that point was on, after we lost JonBenet, her focus became Burke, our 9-year-old son. And that was Patsy's mission, was to be a good mom to Burke.
How did she and you protect Burke throughout all this trauma?
Well, we tried to give him a normal childhood. I mean, he was a 9-year-old little boy, and we would have to find ways to get him to school so the media didn't. Yeah. We didn't want his picture out there. Mm-hmm. We wanted to protect him that way, and we wanted to protect him from the chaos that was going on around us. So we had him spend some time with a child psychologist just to help him with issues. So not that we were told that a child with that kind of experience has the ability to compartmentalize things. Mm-hmm. And they said it may become more of an issue when he's 40. So I think Burke did a pretty good job of compartmentalizing, as far as we could tell. He's quiet like me, so you never knew quite what was going through his mind. But I remember one evening I came up to his room and he was building a little barricade in front of his door, and I thought, man, that's sad that he feels like he needs to do that.
How have you managed with your health? You lost 2 daughters, your wife. There's a ongoing investigation, criticism, rumors, tabloid fodder. I mean, how does it affect you?
Well, certainly our life got turned upside down. I was more or less unemployable. I had people that said, "Gee, we'd love to have you come work for us, but we can't afford to have our name on the front of the National Enquirer as a company."
Never thought of that part of it, of course.
Yeah, it's a tough world out there, and it's not easy. So every day you get up, you got to kind of put on the armor of God and get out there. And it's not fair. Life's not always fair. I was angry at God, and it just didn't make sense. C.S. Lewis said, the death of a child calls into question the existence of God. How could God let a beautiful, young, innocent child perish? Yeah. And Patsy and I were fortunate too, because a lot of times when you lose a child, I'm told, and I've read some statistics on it, that a marriage fails. And I think it's because you potentially could blame the other for what happened. John, why didn't you check the doors, make sure they were locked? Patsy, why didn't you have JonBenet, in public performances? But we didn't do that. And we were kind of husband and wife against the world, is how we felt. She was a wonderful, wonderful person and a wonderful mother. I couldn't have imagined a better mother for my children. Thank you.
Part of the reason that it always bothered me that your family was under suspicion, and you alluded to it, is that the thought that there's people out there who actually did this crime who have gotten away with it so far. We're back with John Ramsey in a daytime exclusive interview. He's revealing the brand new push to find his daughter's killer. He's using DNA. Now, there have been numerous suspects, some have even confessed, from John Mark Carr to Gary Oliva and many more. Emotionally, every time you hear about one of these suspects, even when I just mention their name right now and they get press, how do you respond to that?
Well, early on, some of these people came to light, and I would be told about them by our attorneys, and one in particular, I said, that's the guy. I mean, look at the circumstances. And they said, whoa, 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 don't do a Boulder police on us here. We don't know. Let's get more information. we have DNA evidence. That's really the key. And I know in the case of John Mark Carr, he made a very compelling confession over a period of months. And the district attorney at the time did the right thing in finding him. It was amazing detective work to even find him. He was in Thailand. His DNA didn't match. So, and so really the key when someone, and I had another fellow that called our minister and said, I want to confess, I killed JonBenet, but I first want to talk to Mr. Ramsey. So I spent probably 45 minutes on the phone with him, and he had a few pieces of, you're always looking for that little nugget of information that isn't out in the media, which there's not much because everything got put out there by the police. But he had a couple things that were like, okay, I think you were in our house. And he confessed, but he wanted to come to Boulder to confess. And then he wanted me to buy him airline tickets, to send him money for it's like, and I was, okay. Our attorney said, no way, we're not going to send this guy a check so he can allegedly buy airline tickets. Well, then they found out he was just trying to
extort money.
Extort money, yeah.
All through the while, the questions about the ability of the Boulder police to manage this case are being raised. Mm-hmm. Just one last question about you. What was their alleged motivation for you to hurt your daughter?
Well, we learned later that their whole case was based on the fact that we didn't act right that morning. No other reason. We didn't act right.
How were you supposed to act?
I don't know. I'm not sure. For example, I was criticized, the detective who was there said, well, he was casually going through the mail because the mail came through our door through a slot. I was looking for another communication from the kidnapper. That's what they should have been doing. That's what I was focused on. How do I get my daughter back? What do I got to do? I'm not going to go sit in the corner and wail and cry.
So what could you give me some just high-level examples of what they could have done differently?
Well, the chief of police made the statement to the media, we didn't treat it as a crime scene because we thought it was a kidnapping. And that shows you the perspective they were looking at this from. So there were so many mistakes made.
You find your daughter and you do, I think, what is natural. What would you do if you found an unconscious child of yours? Pick up the child.
Yeah, and of course I was criticized for disturbing the crime scene. And I thought, this is my child. What was I supposed to say? Oh gosh, it's a crime scene, I better not touch her. It was nonsense. But we were dealing with just grossly inexperienced people.
Do you believe the killer of your daughter, JonBenet, is still out there?
I do. I mean, he could be dead. I don't know. But yeah, he's not been caught. And, the real fear is that he's done this again. I don't know. But this is an evil, evil person.
So a sick man has brought his shadow into your life. I'd like to spend the rest of the show with our audience going through some very updated information, clues that may help us. Up next, could hidden clues inside a suitcase lead to the truth about JonBenet's killer? We're going to walk through the crime scene in great detail. That's next. Today, new evidence in one of the most devastating unsolved cases in American history, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Her father, John Ramsey, is here, along with a private investigator, John St. Augustine, who's been dedicated to solving this case since the beginning. Criminal investigator John St. Augustine has been involved in over 200 death investigations during his esteemed career. But none have haunted him like the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. A champion of John and Patsy Ramsey from the beginning, he was one of the first proponents of the theory that JonBenet's murder was committed by an intruder, and was one of the two private investigators hired by the Ramsey family in 1999 to help clear their names and to find out exactly who murdered their daughter. As a result, St. Augustine was given unprecedented access to the family, as well as all of the evidence surrounding JonBenet's death. Today, over 2 decades later, St. Augustine and John Ramsey continue their quest, with a breakthrough and a new push to find JonBenet's killers. We're back with JonBenet Ramsey's father, John Ramsey, and the private investigator, John St. Augustine. So, John St. Augustine, while the world was focused on the Ramsey family, what do you believe happened to the actual crime scene, the evidence? What was being overlooked?
Boy, Dr. Oz, there was a lot of things that were overlooked. I think Boulder got caught up in just the juiciness, for lack of a better word, of what was going on Christmas Day of 1996. All the media migrated to Boulder, and everybody wanted to know what happened to this 6-year-old little girl. And Boulder got caught up in all that notoriety that was going on, and they failed to conduct an investigation. You know, they picked rocks that they wanted to look under that pointed to the family, but disregarded all the evidence, you know, that pointed away from them. And so you have an obligation as an investigator to really do just one thing, and that's to gather facts and seek the truth. Not to draw an opinion of somebody's innocence or guilt. That's up to a jury. And so when Boulder went in and looked at this case, they neglected to do just basic things with the crime scene in the initial investigation. I mean, they had John Ramsey go out and look for things out of the ordinary. That is not the role of a family member in a home. What you do when a kidnapping happens is you immediately sterilize that environment. The integrity of that crime scene is so important. And so what you have to do is you got to remove everybody out of there, because you're looking for footwear impressions, you're looking for palm prints, you know, fingerprints, you're looking for DNA, you're looking for anything that might point to a killer.
So you brought evidence to us today that you believe will prove that there was an intruder that killed JonBenet. We're going to reconstruct what the house looked like the morning after JonBenet was murdered. So come on up. The first room we're going to go into, and John Ramsey, this is your basement. So this suitcase, do you recognize that?
I do. Well, that was the first thing I noticed that was out of the ordinary that shouldn't have been there. We kept the suitcases in a different part of the basement.
All right. As a detective, you walk in, you see this. What does this mean to you, to us?
Well,
one last thing. It's wintertime, right? It's December 25th, 26th. So why is that window open?
It shouldn't have been. No, that was the other thing that was abnormal. No.
Okay. John St. Augustine.
So, Dr. Oz, I mean, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to see that this is a clue, right? You have an open window. You actually have a scuff mark along the back of the wall.
Oh, yes, yes.
You see that?
Yeah, from a shoe or something.
Right. And then you have this suitcase, but I think the important thing about the suitcase is that there was actually some glass found on top of the suitcase.
On here?
On top of the suitcase, yes, sir. And then inside of the suitcase was a duvet and a Dr. Seuss book. But what's important to note about this is that the duvet had fibers from what JonBenet was wearing the morning that Mr. Ramsey found her. So what that tells me is that either her clothes were in there at some point or her body was placed in there. And if you look at this, right, is this where the killer or killers either tried to enter or tried to exit? Did they use the suitcase as a way to exit? Or was her body in there at some point and they couldn't fit the suitcase out of that window, so they take her out and then place her in a room? Now, keep in mind, this room is adjacent to where her body was ultimately found. What law enforcement failed to do, which is another thing that just is mind-boggling to me, is they never opened that door, Dr. Oz. In law enforcement, when we go out and do search warrants and arrest warrants, we open doors, we open closets, we look in dryers, we look everywhere. How is it that nobody bothered to open a door that morning, and the only person that opens it is Mr. Ramsey?
So you're down here by yourself. You see this. This is a little alarming.
Mm-hmm.
Your thought when you see this is?
It's not right. Something's abnormal.
So you walk out of this room, take the right, and then there's a closed door.
Mm-hmm.
What was that room?
Well, it was an old house. It used to be a coal room where they stored coal for the furnace, I guess. And we just used it for Christmas tree storage and stuff that you didn't use.
And when you opened that door?
Mm-hmm. Well, then I saw JonBenet immediately. And
She was literally laying just right there in front of him.
yeah, so there's this surge of relief that I'd found her. Mm-hmm. But I pretty quickly realized that she had tape on her mouth, which I took off. And I didn't see the the garrote around her neck. It was so deeply embedded. I just picked her up and screamed. And went upstairs, took her upstairs. I didn't know what else to do. You wanted to take her to help.
You did the right thing. There's not a single person watching who wouldn't have done that same thing. Period. That part, I think we're all clear on. You don't have to be a detective to figure that out.
Yeah.
What's driving me crazy, you pointed it out, is once you see this, and the evidence is everywhere now.
I mean, really what's crazy about the whole thing, Dr. Oz, is you've got to think about this. This is Christmas night, okay? Somebody abducts her from her basement. So if you were to believe that Mr. Ramsey did this, you're saying he took her from her room, he stun gunned her twice, he then puts a garrote around her neck, strangles her, sexually assaults her, and then beats her over the head after she dies. She actually had a crack in her skull over 2 occipital lobes. I mean, it was a brutal murder.
Now, there's more evidence. So in that coal room, on the floor, there was evidence.
So this is one of the footwear impressions that were actually found in that room where JonBenet's body was located by Mr. Ramsey. And you can actually see, Dr. Oz, it's high tech. You can see it in reverse.
Oh, yes,
There's
yes.
the H, the I, and a dash, and then TEC. That particular footwear impression was found in that area where her body was located.
I'd seen this. What I had not seen till today, come on down, is 2 other footprints. One of them particularly eerie. So, John, if you can help us see what I see already these little marks here. What is this?
This is actually an unknown footwear impression. This was not tied to anybody in the family. Not Burke, not Patsy, not John. But was found, interestingly enough, Dr. Oz, next to what appears to be JonBenet's right foot. You can actually see here the outline of her foot.
You see that their toes here?
We believe that to be her bare foot.
Can you all see that now? You see this? See, I'm not even, it doesn't take much to imagine this, and there's her big toe there.
Right. And then the unknown footwear impression right here.
So come, let's have a seat, because one of the ways you got exonerated was through that DNA evidence. And that's the real question I have now, right? Because we talked about DNA earlier, we've talked about it on this show a lot. What's the latest about this DNA evidence, John? Do either of you know? Is Boulder Police doing what a lot of the other police districts are doing now, which is to use modern technology to figure out who the murderer is?
We don't know. What I hope they're doing, and if they're not, they should be, is pursuing this public genealogy database search, which has been so successful in solving at least a half a dozen old cold cases in the last 6 months. We need a law in this country, universally, that if you're arrested for a felony, your DNA printed just like your fingerprinted.
Yes.
I was told by thank you. This is, if we did that, I was told by a police chief who befriended us, he said if we had that law in this country, we would solve 10,000 murders overnight.
Millions of us have given our DNA in. That's a lot of people to test against. Someone's related to one of these killers, but there's more evidence I want to bring into this. Up next, we're going to reveal brand new DNA evidence that could finally catch JonBenet's killer. Stay with us.
JonBenet Ramsey, the 6-year-old beauty pageant queen forever etched into our minds as the haunting face of the country's most baffling murder mystery. It's been over 20 years since her small body was discovered by her father in the basement of their Boulder, Colorado home. Today, John Ramsey continues his crusade to see his daughter's killers brought to justice.
We're back with JonBenet Ramsey's father, John Ramsey, and the private investigator who has been working on this case since the very beginning, John St. Augustine. Also joining us is a team working with law enforcement. They're here to reveal DNA evidence that they've been collecting for years. Cousins Jim Smith and Cindy Marr. And I should point out, Cindy's father was Lou Smith, the famed detective who worked on the case until his death in 2010. His final words were about finding JonBenet's killer. Cindy, what did he say at that final moment?
He just wanted this case to be pursued. He didn't want it to die with him. And so probably 2 weeks before he was in the hospital, and he asked me to get a pencil and write this down, and he gave me the name of his number 1 suspect. And from there, we were supposed to go down the list.
Now, I understand he left behind thousands of files, lots of paperwork here.
Yes.
But there was one document in particular that the team believes is key to finding the killer. Jim, if you don't mind, explain what that document is. What did you find?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, there are thousands of files. Lou was meticulous in collecting and categorizing every piece of paper. And over the course of, only nearly 13 years that he worked on this, he funneled all of that into a spreadsheet of names. And so we have taken that spreadsheet now, and our mission is to collect DNA and test DNA. And that's what we do, and we have been doing since he died, is we collect DNA. And sometimes it's maybe through some kind of a mail thing where we have a ruse and somebody replies back to us and we send the letter in to our lab for testing.
They licked the stamp.
They lick the stamp, exactly. We have staked somebody out. I mean, yeah, our spouses went with us and we staked somebody out and we followed that person and collected a straw that they used. And we sent that in for testing.
Now, you've agreed to share with us an exclusive view of this spreadsheet.
Yes.
That's okay. I want to share with the entire audience as well. Let's go up to the monitor and just walk us through how you're going through this investigation. And this is the modern era. This is how we're going to find folks when we don't have better clues. So this is the actual spreadsheet, I guess, that your dad had crafted. So walk through the top of those lists up there.
Sure. So again, we have the priority. We talk about whether Lou had it, whether they had an alibi or not. Did they have handwriting samples tested? And again, in terms of, do we have hair? We're coming over here. Was there DNA collected? Was it blood? Was it saliva? Was it tested? And then any comments that we have. And most importantly, what we're looking to do is complete. So when Lou marked it as complete, that means that he had moved on, that wasn't the person who committed this murder. And so we have a lot of areas, as you can see, where we don't have an X yet. And that's what we work on all the time.
So you're going through all these names, picking them out. Jim, do you believe in your heart of hearts that the killer's name is on that list?
Absolutely. Lou had solved nearly 200 homicides that ended in conviction, and he was so meticulous, as I mentioned, about putting things together, and he believed the name was on the list. And we believe the name is on the list, and we just keep working through, because we're going to, at some point, find somebody that matches.
So let me just say,
go ahead.
The dad just brought up something that was important, right? That if we just use one of these natural genealogy systems, we'd actually pretty quickly be able to figure out that the DNA would be close enough to a cousin of someone on that list that you could sort of triangulate it and match them up. It would be inexpensive, relatively speaking, much more impactful. We've been talking to CC Moore and other experts in this area. It's really difficult, choosing from 1 out of 1,000 people, but you can be choosing from 1 out of 1 person.
Right. The issue we have is that the DNA report that we have is years and years old. And our understanding is the evidence, the items like the long johns and the underwear, would need to be retested under the current testing procedures to come out with a raw file that could be then uploaded to these genealogical websites. So we don't have that because we don't have the evidence to get retested. That would be Boulder Police would need to do that to get it retested to be able to get it into the format that they could upload to these sites.
So that if I understand correctly, if I can speak for the people on the stage right now, our hope is that the Boulder Police Department will have the DNA reanalyzed, the modern techniques that are available, so it can be uploaded to a site like GEDmatch, where we've already had a lot of success in this country finding killers.
Yep.
I don't really get why that wouldn't have already been done.
This is such a powerful tool. It's been demonstrated by, as we say, half a dozen that I know of, old cold cases that have been solved, that to not do it, it would be sad.
What would it mean to you if we could finally find the people who murdered your daughter, or the person?
Well, what I'm interested in, there was a time when I felt like you tell me who did this and we won't need a trial. I'll take care of it. But then I realized, well, that makes me a bad person too. That's not right, even though my anger was just intense. And then I got to a point where I said, okay, I'm supposed to forgive, but I'm really not the ultimate victim here. JonBenet is the ultimate victim. She can't forgive because she's not here. So that's going to be between God and this person. Then I realized that forgiveness is really a gift I give myself. I release that anger, that desire for revenge, and move on. And I'd like it to be brought to a conclusion for the sake of my grandchildren, for the sake of my children, so there's clarity in that for them. But it's going to be difficult.
Well, I'm hoping
go
there's
through it.
someone else that gets arrested that is the true perpetrator,
Yeah.
whose DNA matches. I think we have the technology. It's at our fingertips. We need to use it. Up next, what we know about the suspects on the list currently being investigated. Stay with us.